What's up, world? Another week has passed by and it's time for a new screencast. This week we're gonna create a workflow using Gulp for our Angular 2 TypeScript project. We're gonna lint our code, compile it, and serve it all using Gulp. We're also gonna take a look at how we can debug our TypeScript files instead of the JavaScript files that are transpiled from our TypeScript files. So let's get right to it. Before we try to optimize our workflow, let's take a look at the workflow that I'm currently using. So the first thing I need to do before I start developing is I kick off the TypeScript compiler with a W parameter, which means watch. So we're telling the TypeScript compiler to watch the files, and which files are we watching? Then we're gonna need to come here and take a look in the tsconfig.json file. So every time we add a new file, we need to extend this list with a new file for it to compile. And then we start off the HTTP server, which I've installed as a global node package. And after doing so, we can finally come here to our browser and refresh the page and serve the application. And one thing we notice here is that when we debug our application, we are working with the transpiled JavaScript files, so we're not actually working with the TypeScript files, which would be the preferred way. So we want to do all this with Gulp instead, and as soon as we do changes to our TypeScript files or HTML files, we want the browser to automatically refresh and reflect the changes without the need for refreshing the page for ourselves. And we're also going to do some basic code analysis by linting our code. Alright, so let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do is run npm init to create our packages JSON file. So we're just going to take the default values here and give it an entry point of gulp file.js instead, and then just take the default values for everything else. Well, I can put my name here. Let's say it's MIT license, so yeah, that's fine. And now, before we start doing Gulp stuff, we're gonna actually need to install Gulp using the Node Package Manager. So we're gonna get Gulp TypeScript for compiling, and Gulp source maps. Or let's actually do the source maps later and just do the compiling part for now. We're going to run save dev. And what this will do is, right, so I'm going to I need to do npm install, of course. So this will go ahead and install Gulp and Gulp TypeScript for us locally, and we're telling it that it's a dev dependency. So we take a look here in our package.json file that was created. We're gonna see a dev dependencies property created here once we're done, and there it goes. So we have dependencies to Gulp and Gulp TypeScript. And now we're gonna create a couple of files here that we're gonna use. We're gonna create a gulp file.js, and we're gonna create a gulp config.js. In the config file, we're gonna keep all our configuration, like where the files are located and stuff, and where we want to put them. So we're gonna export a module here. Return config. So in here we want to have a couple of variables, like all our TypeScript files that we want to compile. Where are they located? And they are located under app, and then in various subfolders, and then we want to take all our TypeScript files. In our gulp file, we're gonna need to first of all import gulp. And we're gonna get Gulp TypeScript for compiling. and we're going to import our configuration. Actually, I need to execute this as a function. And now we can create our first Gulp task. We're going to call it compile TypeScript. I'm going to pass it a function. So to compile our TypeScript files, we're also going to need to reference our TypeScript definition files, as we can see here in our tsconfig file. We can actually go ahead and get rid of this, since we're gonna compile with Gulp instead. So we want to create a local array. Whoops, can't spell. TS files. We're gonna get all TypeScript files, but we're also gonna get all the typings. And we're gonna need to add this guy here. And the typings are like located under typings .d.ts. Right. And now we can use Gulp. We're gonna pass the source files, source TS files. We're gonna pipe them to the TypeScript compiler. And one more thing that I forgot to mention is I'm actually gonna use this tsconfig file to create the options that we want to pass into to the TypeScript compiler. We're gonna do so by defining a variable called tsproject. We're gonna create it from the tsconfig file by passing in the name of the configuration file. So this is in the documentation for Gulp TypeScript module, so you can go ahead and look it up. And alright, so we just passed the TS project here. Let's format this a bit nicer. And now we want to return the result. So for now we're not going to bundle anything, so I'm just gonna output the result along with the TypeScript files. So we can go ahead and get rid of the JS files here, just to make sure that we compile it with Gulp instead of the TypeScript watch command that I ran earlier. So tsresult.js, we're gonna pipe it to Gulp destination, and then we're gonna output it somewhere. Let's say ts output path, so we can change this later. So let's create a ts output path. We're just gonna tell it that to put it into the same location. So the output path is where we find our TypeScript files, and this will go ahead and put it along with the TypeScript files here. So let's take a look at our Gulp file again, and hopefully this will compile our TypeScript files for us. So if you run Gulp and compile TypeScript module.js, right? So we have some kind of error here. Let's find out what happened. Gulp file.config cannot find module. Alright, so gulp file.config, gulp.config. Alright, so this should work a lot better. Compiling TypeScript, it's compiled. And now we can see that we've compiled our TypeScript files with Gulp instead, actually uses the same TypeScript compiler as the node package TypeScript compiler. Alright, so now that we've done that, let's go ahead and create source map files that we can use to debug our TypeScript files. To create our source maps, we're gonna need to come and install a new package. It's called Gulp source maps. We're gonna save it as a dev dependency. And now we can go ahead and require it up here. And now what we need to do is tell it to initialize it right here after we have provided our source files. We're gonna pipe this to the source maps module and tell it to initialize. And then down here, before we output our files, we're just gonna write the source map files. And it's simple as that. So if we run our TypeScript compiler now, Gulp compile TypeScript, we should get source map files as well that we can use to debug our TypeScript files. So that's great. So let's take a look at how we can analyze our TypeScript files. And for that, we're going to use something called tslint. Let's do an npm install gulp tslint. And now let's create a new task called gulp tslint that will vet our code. We're just gonna pass it all our source files, which are located in all ts variable. We're gonna pipe it to tslint, and we're gonna create the report pros, and we're gonna pass it an options parameter for it to emit the errors. We can investigate what happens if we don't pass this option. So before I can do this, I obviously need to go ahead and import it. tslint. Right. And now let's try this out. And nothing really happens. So why is that? That's because we're missing a file called tslint.json. So we can go ahead and get that file from the node package manager repo. I'm just gonna cut here and copy paste it. Alright, so here's the tslint.json file, and you can turn off and on the options that you feel that you want to follow in your code. And once this file is in place and we run our tslint command instead, we're going to see that we got a couple of errors here in our TypeScript files. We're not going to correct these now in the screencast, but I'm going to correct them afterward and commit a cleaned up version of the TypeScript files. So now we only have one thing left to do in the screencast, and that's to serve the files. And to serve them, we're gonna use something called superstatic together with browser sync to keep our JavaScript and HTML files in sync with what's shown in the browser. So we're gonna go ahead and npm install browser sync. So there are many other ways to do this and a couple of competitive web servers out there. So this is just a way to do it. I'm not telling you that it's the only way or even the correct way. Right, so it's called bower-sync. Alright, so we're back. It takes a while to install those two dependencies, but once you've done, you can see that they're installed in the package.json file. We have browser sync and superstatic there. So now let's write tasks to serve the application. And we'll create a new Gulp task. Let's call it serve. And we actually want serve to do tslint and compile our TypeScript files before we try to serve the application. We're going to tell Gulp also that this is our default task. And before we actually do the serving part, we're also going to tell Gulp to watch all our TypeScript files. And if they change, we want to run tslint and recompile the TypeScript files. And now let's serve our code with browser sync. And once again, we're going to need to come to the top and introduce these two modules. Right. So let's configure browser sync now. I can't browser sync. Did I misspell it? Yeah. Right. So browser sync. We're gonna configure it by passing some options to it. First of all, we're gonna tell it to which port it will run on. So let's say 3000, just to switch from 8080. We're gonna tell it which files to serve. So it should serve index.html and keep track of all our JavaScript files for us. We wanted to inject changes, log file changes should be false. We don't want it to be too verbose, so we're gonna put the log level to silent. So this is just the default things that I always do. If you want a full list of all of the options, you can go ahead and check out the documentation. We want to be notified that we're connected. We want to have a reload delay of 0, and the server will have a base directory located under app, and we're going to use superstatic as a middleware. And we also don't want this to be too verbose, and this is really up to you what you prefer. I usually set the bug option to false. Alright, so if we switch over to our command prompt here and just type gulp, we compiled the code, we ran tslint, and now we are serving the application. So Chrome started automatically for us, and we're connected to browser sync. So that's pretty cool. And we can see here on the source that we have app.ts. We can actually debug our TypeScript files instead. So if we have a breakpoint here in the constructor and the about, and on the about component, we can see that we hit that breakpoint in the TypeScript file instead of the JavaScript file. So that's great. Let's take a look at how the browser is kept in sync as we make changes to our TypeScript files and they're transpiled to JavaScript. Let's change the text here to welcome to the about page and save the file. You can see that we compiled and we ran tslint and the browser was refreshed for us. So we don't need to refresh the page every time we make some changes to our TypeScript files. Alright, so that's about everything I wanted to show for this screencast, and we're gonna probably not do an episode next week since I'm gonna be mountain biking down the French Alps. So wish me good luck, guys. And so we've seen how how easy it is to create a Gulp workflow. And there are a lot of seed projects out there, and usually you don't want to take a seed project as is and then just use it without modifying it. So it's good to know to have at least have some basic knowledge of how you can customize your Gulp workflow, even if you start off with a seed project. So I hope you guys learned something, and until next time, have a nice day, guys. Bye.